This is a lesson for 3-3. What we're learning about today is the slope y-intercept method of graphing lines. This is a different method of graphing lines that we did compared to the other day. The other day we had a chart and we picked out values like 0, 1, and 2, sub them into the equation to get your y value, and then you graph the 3 points. You're still going to be graphing 3 points today, but we're not going to use the chart at all. All right. There's really no calculations whatsoever that you need to do today. All that you're going to do, this is called the slope y-intercept method of graphing lines. All that you're going to do is identify the slope, identify the y-intercept. That's step 1 and 2, just like you did before. Then you're going to plot the y-intercept. So you're going to graph this point. Now, that first point that you graph is 0, comma, whatever your plus or minus is from your y-intercept. That first point is always somewhere on the y-axis itself. It's always somewhere on that line. That's always the first point that you graph. And then starting from there, like for example, if we were starting right here, starting right there, then you're going to follow your slope twice to the right. Very important that you're going to the right. You need 3 points total, just like we were graphing 3 points with the chart method. Don't forget to put your arrows on the ends of your lines. If you don't put the arrows on the ends of your lines, you will lose credit when it comes to the quiz. All right. So you got to make sure that you're putting arrows on the ends of your lines, and then you should always label your line. That's a good habit to have. So let's just start off by identifying the slope and the y-intercept. Remember that the slope is the number that is in front of your x. Remember that slope is always written as a fraction, all right? If we have a whole number, like this first one, all right, we have a 2 in front of the x. We're not just going to put 2 for our slope. We want to put 2 over 1, all right? We always want, anytime that you have an integer, so a non-decimal number, we want to put that number over 1 as a fraction, whether it's positive or whether it's negative. All right. If this was a -2, we'd put -2 over 1. The y-intercept, the y-intercept is the plus or minus after your x. Remember that y-intercepts are always written with parentheses and a comma. It's always 0, comma, whatever your plus or minus is. So this is 0, comma, 3. Now, if this was a -3, we'd put a -3 there. For this middle one, remember that anytime that you have an x all by itself, there's really a 1 in front of it. So when we go to look at the slope for this one, the slope would not just be 1, it would be 1 over 1. We take a look at slope for this third one. The slope is the number in front of your x. That slope is 3 over 5. When it's a fraction, we just leave it as a fraction. Now, this fourth one is a little bit weird. You have a negative sign right in front of the fraction bar. Anytime that you have a negative sign, that negative sign really goes with the top number. So it's really -4 over 3. On like the state test and stuff like that, they like to try and trick you with that negative sign. But the negative sign always goes in your numerator, in the top number in your fraction. Let's take a look at the y-intercepts for these other ones. Remember, y-intercepts are always written 0, comma, whatever your plus or minus is. So this is 0, comma, 1. 0, comma, whatever your plus or minus is. So this is 0, comma, -2. Remember from the other day, we don't have a plus or minus anything in this problem. So there's nothing there. Nothing in math is 0. So this would be 0, comma, 0, because technically I could put a plus 0 here. Now, you already know how to do all of this stuff. The one thing that I'm going to suggest to you when you go to find your slopes today, remember that in your slopes, the top number, because this is important because you're actually going to have to draw the graphs, your top number in your slope is how many you go up or down. Up if it's positive, down if it's negative. And then the bottom number is how many you go over to the right. What I personally like to do, which I think is helpful, is when you write your slope, I would write down next to it that this means up 2 over 1. This means up 1 over 1. This means up 3 over 5. This means because it's negative, this means down 4 over 3. I think that's helpful. You're not going to be required to write those up and down and over, but it's going to be helpful when you go to graph your line. So again, remember, we are graphing lines. You should never get a V shape or a bent line. It should always be a straight line. So the first thing that you're going to be required to do is find the slope in the y-intercept just like we did. So your slope is the number in front of your x. So our slope here is 1/2. That really means up 1 over 2. Your y-intercept is always 0, comma, whatever your plus or minus is. So in this case, it's 0, comma 1. Now we are going to start graphing our line at the y-intercept. Just like we did before with graphing lines, we have a point that we need to graph. Now, here's a little hint. All right, here's a little hint. This y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis. So our first point is always going to be somewhere on that y-axis. So where is 0, comma 1? 0, comma 1 is right here. Your first point will always be on the y-axis. So 0, comma 1 is right there. Now, starting at the y-intercept, we need to follow this pattern. All right, we need to follow this pattern twice because we want 3 dots total. So we starting here at 0, comma 1, we're going to go up 1 over 2. So starting here, we're going up 1 over 2, put a dot. Up 1 over 2, put a dot. If you want to keep on going farther and farther, you can. All right, but the minimum that you need are 3 dots total. Connect your dots with a line. It should form a straight line. Make sure that you put arrows on the ends of your lines, and you should label your line. Again, we could have went out farther if we wanted to by keeping on going up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2. So if we wanted to do that, that's fine, but you at least need 3 dots. All right, you at least need 3 dots. And that's one complete question. See how much quicker and easier this way of graphing lines is rather than having to sub numbers into the equation, find your y values. All right, this way is a lot easier and a lot quicker to graph your line. Let's take a look at this next one. In this next one, remember that there's really a 1 in front of the x. So our slope of our line is 1 over 1. That really means up 1 over 1. Up because it's positive and it's always over to the right. Our y-intercept, where are we going to start our line at, is 0, comma, whatever your plus or minus is. So this one happens to be negative. Now remember, that first dot is always somewhere on the y-axis. So this first dot is at 0, -2. 0, -2 is down here. So now starting at that dot, we need to follow this pattern twice. So we are going up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. There's my 3 dots. Connect my dots, put my arrows, and you should always label your line. Again, if we wanted to keep on doing more dots, we could by keeping on going up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. And we could keep on going with that if we wanted to, but it's not necessary. You just need at least 3 dots. Take a look at the next one. Now, this next one has a negative slope. So let's see what happens with a negative slope. Your slope is the number in front of your x. So our slope this time is -1 over 3. This really means down 1 over 3. Anytime that you have a negative number, negative means down. Positive means up, negative means down. and we're starting off at 0, comma 2. So remember, that first dot is always somewhere on the y-axis. So 0, comma 2 is right here. Now, starting at that point, we need to go down 1 over 3. So starting here, we're going down 1 over 3. Down 1 over 3. If we wanted to keep on going, we could. Down 1 over 3. Connect our dots. It should always form a straight line. If it doesn't, you did something wrong. Put your arrows on the ends of your line. You have to do that. Otherwise, you'll lose points on your quiz. And you need to label your line. Take a look at another one. Negative 4x plus 5. Now, again, remember, your slope is the number in front of your x. Anytime that you have an integer like this, a non-decimal number, that's really over 1. So this is really negative 4 over 1. What does that mean? That means that we are going down 4 over 1. And we're starting off at 0, comma 5. So again, that first point is always somewhere on the y-axis. 0, comma 5. 0, comma 5 is right here. Starting there, we need to follow this pattern. Down 4 over 1. Down 4 over 1. Connect our dots. It should form a straight line. Put your arrows on the ends of your line and label your line. Take a look at the next one. Y equals 3x. Now again, your slope is always written as a fraction, so this number in front of the x is really over 1. So 3 over 1. That really means up 3 over 1. Now, there's nothing, there isn't a plus or minus after our x. So remember, if there's not a plus or minus there, nothing in math is 0. I could technically put a plus 0 there. So 0, 0. Your first dot, your y-intercept, is always somewhere on the y-axis. 0, 0 is right here in the middle, where the x and y-axis cross. So starting there, up 3 over 1. Up 3 over 1. Connect my dots to form my straight line. Put my arrows and label my line. Let's do one last one. Remember that there's always a 1 in front of the x. If you just had the x all by itself, now this time we have a negative sign in front of the x. So this is really negative 1 over 1. Remember, negative means down. So this really means down 1 over 1. And our y-intercept this time is 0, comma negative 4. It's negative 4 because you have a minus 4. The y-intercept is always somewhere on that y-axis, 0, negative 4. So we're going to start right here at 0, negative 4. Now be careful, negative 1 over 1 means down 1. So down 1 over 1, down 1 over 1. Connect my dots, put my arrows, and label my line. So again, that's what you're doing today. All right, that first dot is always on the y-axis. There's no exceptions. All right, I would have showed you something if there was. There are no exceptions to that rule. That first dot is always on the y-axis, and then you have to follow the slope twice. Don't forget to put the arrows on the ends of your line.